Hello, Octalysis Primers. Today we have a very special episode where I interview someone I respect greatly, but also a friend of mine, Ross Smith. And through this interview, you'll see that not only is a very accomplished individual, he's also passionate living his life. And he talks about the concept of developing each area of his brain. So you'll see that he not only has a thriving career in technology, gamification, and Microsoft, he has a lot of other interests that include a lot of right brain, artistic, and whatnot. So to save you time, I want to show you how this interview is broken down to. So because there's many different parts, it ended up being a pretty long interview. So if you want, you can potentially go to the parts that interest you more. So the first part of this interview is just the high level view of who he is, his career, what he do with the gamification. We discuss a little bit about game theory versus gamification design. Part two goes into more of his interests. We talk a lot about skiing. How does that compare to snowboarding as a game that is designed? We talk about the books that he likes and the books that he's interested in. The third part moves into poetry, art, and also the drawings he likes. He's a cartoonist and all these different interesting things that very well-rounded and very exciting, very artistic. And then also we talk a little bit about how to manage people and also influences from his grandmother. Part four, we then go into children, parenting, and also education. And his children are all doing very passionate and successful things. You'll learn about it in that video. And he talks about his philosophy in terms of parenting and interacting with children. So part five is where the meat is, very high quality stuff. We're going deep down into the things that he did at Microsoft in terms of the beta game and terms of the do your job game that didn't work out so well and why he believes it didn't work out, and some other implementations. And you'll see those are pretty low budget kind of implementations that he did. And it was definitely one of the very, very early days of gamification. So he was a pioneer in that. It was very exciting. So check that out if you just want to see gamification design in the corporate space. Part six goes deeper also into leaderboard design, what works, what didn't work for him and his organization, more details on the do your job games and why it failed. And then part seven is more of a wrap up, but offshoot about his PhD in AI displacing jobs that he's researching right now. We talk about this whole topic about what should you do in a world where AI might displace our jobs. And then we also just wrap up and conclude. But it did end up to be a very long video because we really hit it off. We really enjoyed it. So it's a big part, but hopefully all this content is great. My video editor, Howie, said he went through the 2 hours and he thought it was very inspiring. So hopefully you guys feel the same way. All right, check it out. We are interviewing a long-term friend of mine and someone I respect greatly, Ross Smith. And I first knew about Ross Smith from, I believe, the G Summit. Actually, even before that, I think I read some of the work that Ross has done because they're talking about how Microsoft utilized gamification. And at the time, the whole industry is so nascent. People are kind of looking around for, does gamification actually work? Are there credible companies that are doing it? And I think I saw that his projects, maybe I wasn't too familiar with his name at that point. And then I got familiar with him at the G Summit, which I think you spoke at, right? If I remember the right event.
I think we were also on a panel at South by Southwest.
Yes, that was afterwards.
Yes, yeah.
So that was the time where I was like, oh, look, he's a cool guy. I learned from him. He's great. But even though I'm a speaker too, I still have this shyness, like other speakers, I don't want to bother. I don't want to talk to them. So just like, I just respect them from afar. And obviously that's kind of like a false thing because I think most speakers are happy to engage with the audience. But it was only, like you said, at South by Southwest when we spoke again, it's like, oh, okay, now I'm warming up the idea of communicating, and we started communicating, and it seems like we like each other's work. And so we kept in touch, obviously not as frequent as I'd like to be, but so would love to have the audience just learn about your life, your philosophy, not just gamification, but I from what I've known about you, you're doing so many interesting things. I think you're really maximizing your life's potential. I'd love to know that. So let's start from the beginning. Let's share with the audience who you are, what do you do, and even how did you get to where you are today? Just whatever
Okay,
you want
well,
to as an overview.
excellent. Well, thank you, Calvin. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for all your kind words. It's been a real pleasure to kind of come across your work and being able to reference that in a lot of what I do. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak more here. And so yes, so I'll kind of give a little bit of my background. Today, I'm currently supportability engineering manager for Microsoft, and we build diagnostics for enterprise admins to help diagnose problems in mostly cloud services. It sounds almost more fun than playing games, and it is. But my background, so I have been at Microsoft just over 28 years. If you're doing the math, I started as a child prodigy. And
when you were 10, right?
yeah, something like that. But I actually started in support, answering the phones many years ago, and then I moved quickly over to work in engineering on a research project you might have heard of called Windows NT, and then worked on the first few versions of that, and moved over to Office for Office 95, and then back to Windows in 2003, I guess, for Vista and Windows 7. And that's really where we started, and Vista started some of the early gamification work before it was known as that. And I'll tell that story maybe after this. And then I moved to Windows Security as a manager of the core security team there, and then over to what was known as Microsoft Link, and that's where we did the language quality game, and that became Skype for Business. And then when Microsoft bought Skype, I moved over to Skype Consumer, did some games work there as well, and then moved into a Skype for Good and program that had Skype in the classroom, which people may have heard of. A lot of great games work there, and then moved from there to here last August.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like a long journey, and I'm pretty sure most people either know about or have intimate or very up and down relationships with the products you mentioned. Some historically at least has been bumpier than others.
Yeah.
But I think that's all part of the journey, right, of managing a product. And I think it's funny because I think because Microsoft is so big and everyone's using it on a very regular basis, it's everyone likes to put it on the very high standard. Like if things are working, like, oh, why is this happening? But most people, when they launch their own products, entrepreneurs, small companies, there's a lot of issues too, right? And so how to handle this is always a very difficult thing. And I think also it's, in fact, for big companies, it's much harder because of all the different, let's say, silos potentially and different departments. So yeah, and I think the goal of an interview is to think about how to overcome some of these challenges. And of course, you come up with a lot of creative solutions to make things better, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you did mention a little bit of that, of the gamified systems you had in Microsoft. Why don't you go overview about that? And then we're going to probably explore some of the side things you do. And then let's go deep down into some of the topics you brought up.
Great. Yeah. As I was thinking about it, one of the really the first sort of introduction or sort of awareness of, hey, a game could work here was back in, I believe it was Windows Vista timeframe. And there's at the time there was a process where the engineering team would sort of enroll their desktop machines, their office machines, into a system to run a bunch of tests overnight, right? And it was an incredibly important or powerful QA tool, right? Because you could get literally thousands of machines to run things simultaneously. And so there was a lot of value on that, on the results there before you would ship a product. And the challenge was if I, as an engineer, I put my machine into the system overnight and my machine happens to find a bug, I basically lose access to my machine the next day while the developer is trying to figure out what went wrong, right? So there's not a lot of incentive for me locally to, it's sort of like the um, Prisoner's Dilemma, or what is Tragedy of the Commons, right? That there's no reward for me personally to do this, even though the reward to the organization is huge, right?
Yeah.
And so we had an intern at the time, and the challenge came to our team to say, hey, can you get more people to do this? And so we had this intern start to look into like game theory and what could we do in this sort of tragedy of the commons era. And so
Um,
we came up with a very simple, sorry.
okay, so what was the intuition or even acceptance that, okay, to even look into games to begin with? Because most of the time when there's an intern, you know, you give them guidelines, or the intern might even think, oh, well, I'm working in a very professional company. I shouldn't think about anything. I shouldn't mention anything game related. So
Yeah.
did you suggest the direction, give them the go ahead, or they asked about it, or they just say, hey, you just gave me an open blank space to think about things, and this is where I like to go?
Yeah. So we started down sort of the academic path
Mm-hmm.
of sort of traditional formal game theory, and again, Prisoner's Dilemma.
Oh, okay, so
sort of
okay.
that path, and then that kind of led us into, hey, wait a minute, we could actually do a real game here,
Okay.
right? And,
So I want to apologize because I'm familiar with the differences, but I think over the years I heard enough people say
oh
it
yeah,
incorrectly, so I went along with it. So you were
got it.
technically correct, and I because I was in the pre-notion of it ended up being a gamification design, so
Yeah.
I misspoke.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people will just throw terms
Yeah.
around, you know,
And
like
game theory makes sense because you're talking about incentives and
yeah,
you know what would benefit the larger group when individual incentives don't match up. So that is the perfect thing to look into. I agree.
yeah. And so there's and I'm not super familiar with the details, but the scenario where everyone has their cow grazing in the same area, right? And that it's sort of that academic road we went down first, but then, you know, probably like everyone else, oh, game, wait, maybe an actual game would work here, right? And so we built a game called Hangman, which I have learned is not universally known as that, and so it can have, but that's basically where you make a guess at a word, and you know, if you guess correctly, or a letter, I'm sorry, if you guess correctly, you get that letter. If you guess incorrectly, you start to build a stick figure, essentially. So for those not familiar, if you look up Hangman game on the web, you can read more.
We'll have an imagery on the side of the video for
okay that. Okay, great. So it's a very simple game, and so we put this out, built a little website, and the goal was to spell the word beta because we were preparing to release a beta, right? So if I enrolled my machine in overnight, I got the letter B, right? And then we put up a leaderboard with, you know, where is everybody in terms of spelling out beta, right? So I forget the exact rewards, but E is if you did it 5 days in a row, T is if you found a bug, and A is, you know, if you did it for a month or whatever. And it was mind-boggling how effective this was. Literally, VP running into my office like, "Where's my E? Where's my E?" and they call it the glory and shame of the leaderboard, right? That a leaderboard can be very effective, particularly in a work setting, when people are very clear that it's not related to compensation. There's some weirdness there that maybe we can talk about, but the glory is obviously, you know, type A people want to be at the top, right? But then the shame of it is that if I'm a manager and my team is ahead of me, I'm feeling bad. Like, okay, wait a minute, I need to. And then there's some interesting cultural aspects, because some cultures, they will never perform above the manager, right? So all these nuances we didn't learn right off, obviously, in day one. But what we did see was a huge increase in participation for a really, really simple game. So that was sort of our introduction to this idea, and the gamification wasn't a word yet, or at least anything that I'd seen. But that was our introduction to, hey, wait a minute, this concept of play and competition, and a lot of the, you know, that you talk about in your framework, a lot of those characteristics of motivation can be very effective in the workplace. So that was the introduction. I can go through a series and some of the things we learned, or
Oh,
maybe
we'll get into that soon. So I wanted to break what you just said down also. So interestingly, the beginning of going down this gamification path is a semantics reason, where you're looking at game theory, which I said makes super logical sense. And then you're like, oh, well, game theory, game design sounds similar to let's use a game. So that's very interesting. One thing that I wanted to note is that the game itself is not complicated, right? It didn't take a lot of technology to build or anything.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah. So that's a common fear. People say, oh, we don't have the budget to. No, it's like, just like hide and seek has no technology, can still be fun, right?
Yeah.
Little
Yep.
paper board games. And so the rules of the game is you have hangman. And so each desired action produces a letter. And so one of the disciplines we have is we want to make sure we identify all the desired actions of what people should be doing with or without the gamification, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, they're not doing it, and therefore that's what gamification comes in place. But the discipline we usually have is, well, these designs must motivate the desired action. If it doesn't, if it's just fun, then it's actually a distraction, and it should be thrown away. So your design is the desired. If you do the desired actions of what benefits the company, you get a letter, and the letter is pre-assigned to the activity itself. My question is, with Hangman, you could have the wrong letter and get closer to your death in the game, right? So how do people manage the dynamic? Because you're like, I want to do this activity, but what if it causes me to leave? So is there a difference in variation here?
So we were only focused on the positive, right? So there was really no actual sort of hangman. It was more just get the letters, right? So maybe a different game that would get it. But to your point on the behaviors, I think that's critical. And the one area, and we came up with a bunch of different names for it, but the do your job game does not work, right? It completely backfires. And so what we ran into for this one, as an example, is out of nowhere, one guy just flew up the leaderboard, right? And somehow was, like, if I do it, I have one or maybe two machines in my office. So I get the letter B and I get some points for, I get 2 points a night for doing it. And so after a month, if I'm really diligent about it, I might have 60 points, right? Well, and out of nowhere, some guy comes in and shows up with like 400 points. We're like, wait, how does this happen? And then he wins the mountain bike that we give it away, right? Well, it turns out that he had a lab, and his lab was supposed to enroll all their machines into the system overnight, but he wasn't doing it. Right. So what we've learned is in the do your job game, the dangers of the do your job is now you're conflicting with rewards. Like, am I doing this to earn points in the game or a letter, or am I doing this to get a paycheck? Yeah. Right. And people get really weird, I guess, emotional, defensive, like when those two cross. So it's really critical that that the emphasis is on voluntary activity, right? Things that benefit the organization, call them organizational citizenship behaviors. And that's another term to look up. There's some great reading on that. But it's things that I can do to make the organization better that aren't necessarily part of my job. So thinking about, I can volunteer to clean the coffee pot at the end of the day, right? Makes our team a better place. It's not like I'm going to get promoted for that. Right? And so that's where games work well, but overlaying the game on people doing their job, unless it's integrated with the HR systems and the performance valuation and compensation, which I've never seen done. Love to try it sometime, but so the value of the games, the rules, you can see the leaderboard. A lot of those things don't exist in organizations, right? All of a sudden you get a promotion 1 year because you may have done something, but did that do it, or was it the last 4 years of doing things? And there's a lack of clarity. Games give you that. Games give you structure and rules. Yeah. So it'd be great to see an experiment where you could integrate those things. But until that happens, until you have the opportunity to really work with an HR or financial system, it's best to just focus on these citizenship behaviors.
Yeah, actually, that's a huge difference between intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation design. And it's important to realize that, when you look at the game industry, a lot of people say, oh, add incentives, add rewards, financial rewards, and that's gamification. And that's a big thing because the word gamify, right, literally means to make
Yeah.
game-like, right? But what does make game-like mean? What does it mean if something is more like a game? Does it mean there's graphic? Does it mean there's rewards? Does it mean there's like animation or powers? We're not. Everyone has their own interpretation, and so I focus on the core psychology that games bring out of you. So there's a lot of times where we look at people, companies, and they say, "Oh, well, we can't afford to give them financial incentives. So how can we do anything?" But I'm like, hey, focus on the play, right? If you look at games in the market, almost none of these games say, hey, do the desired actions and we'll give you money, or we'll give you some financial incentive. They're just like, hey, you actually have to pay us to continue playing or play even better, have more fun, right? And so that play is so important. And I think what you've looked into is how to add more play to the system. There is actually a MOOC platform that I talked to before, and or my friend talked to the CEO, and my friend was like, "Yeah, you should really add gamification to your platform." And he's like, "Oh, we're going to have gamification." It's like, "Really? I've never seen it. What is it?" It's like, "Well, we pay our instructors." And then I thought, well, that means by definition, every single job in the world is a game, right? But most people don't really see it that way. So I think that's something interesting. I would like to explore the leaderboard aspect later too, and a few other things. But let's take a few steps back and let's look at you as a more holistic person, because I know you dedicate a lot of effort and energy into thinking about how to live life holistically. So tell us about more of your hobbies, side interests, all the things that are non-Microsoft and maybe even tech related.
You're one step closer to greatness. Now check out part 2 to complete your transformation.